Okay, let's jump right into this. Welcome to today's explainer. We're going to break down the absolutely fascinating kind of snowball effect of how the United States transformed into the world's leading superpower. I mean, look at the globe today. American influence is literally everywhere. But here's the thing you have to understand. This massive geopolitical dominance, it didn't just happen overnight. And it definitely wasn't an accident. It's the direct result of some very deliberate expansionist policies and incredibly strategic positioning during major global conflicts since 1850.
But before we really map out the history here, we have to stop and ask ourselves, what exactly defines this ultimate global status? Like when you hear the word superpower, what actually comes to mind? Is it the fact that a country's brands and companies are the most famous in the world? Is it having the absolute highest number of Olympic medals or, say, Nobel Prizes? Or is it just sheer, unrivaled military might?
Well, a massive indicator of superpower status is this absolutely staggering number right here, over $20 trillion. That represents the current U.S. gross domestic product. It's an almost unfathomable amount of wealth and economic gravity. To put that into perspective, it's just a monumental chunk of the entire world's money. But as we're going to see in this explainer, the United States wasn't always the center of the global economy, not even close.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We've got 1. Defining the superpower. 2. Post-1850 territorial expansion. 3. Profiting from global conflicts. 4. Cold War and global reach. 5. The talent advantage. And finally, 6. The superpower reality check. We'll trace the whole chronological rise right up to a pretty sobering look at modern domestic reality.
All right, let's get into Section 1, Defining the Superpower, the historic shift in global dominance.
To truly understand this massive, entirely unprecedented pivot, we have to look at the historical baseline. If you look back over the last 2,000 years of history, for nearly 1,800 of those years, global wealth actually revolved around Asia. India and China were the absolute, undisputed economic heavyweights of the world. It wasn't until the 1900s that a rapid, monumental shift happened, propelling America to the very top of global GDP in basically just a century. So how did they flip the script so incredibly fast?
Well, that brings us to Section 2, Post-1850 territorial expansion, from joining states to overseas annexations.
The crucial point here is that America's rise kicked off with deliberate, sweeping territorial expansion. The U.S. actively absorbed new territories to rapidly grow its economic footprint. Now, because it was a democracy, you had states like Texas, after fighting for their freedom from Mexico, actively choosing to join the U.S. But make no mistake, the U.S. wasn't just sitting back waiting for people to join. They had a very clear intention to expand. They overthrew the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1898. They annexed Puerto Rico and Guam, and even paid Spain $20 million for the Philippines, which, by the way, wouldn't get its independence until 1946. So theoretically, the U.S. claimed it wasn't a colonizer like Britain or France. But their actions? They told a very different story. Just to anchor this expansionist drive in reality, think about this. That entire, massive Alaskan landmass was purchased from Russia in 1867 for a mere $7.2 million. I mean, what an incredibly strategic bargain. It vastly expanded the nation's borders and its access to untouched resources. Simply put, the bigger the country, the bigger the economy. Moving right along to Section 3, Profiting from Global Conflicts, the Economic Boom of the World Wars. So we also have to examine a completely different engine for growth, which you might call a lucky pivot during the World Wars. While Europe was entirely devastated, France, Germany, and the UK literally destroying each other's infrastructure, the US was geographically secure, sitting safely across the ocean on the sidelines. They participated, yes, but the fighting wasn't on their soil. Instead, they sold weapons to Europe and turned a massive net profit. And because the US was so incredibly stable, Europeans started buying up US dollars to protect their wealth. This whole dynamic culminated in 1944 when 44 allied countries agreed to literally link their currencies to the US dollar, cementing it as the global standard. Talk about a game changer. Capitalizing on this newfound post-war economic dominance, the U.S. played the central role in establishing massive international organizations. We're talking about institutions like the IMF, the UN, and GATT, which later became the WTO. These were designed specifically to reduce trade barriers and promote international trade and globalization over nationalism. Basically, by writing the rules of global trade, the U.S. ensured its economic dominance was entirely locked in. Which takes us to Section 4, Cold War and Global Reach, Proxy Wars and a Worldwide Military Footprint.
Right, so by the 1950s, the globe had totally fractured into a bitter ideological war. To counter Soviet influence, the US actively intervened in the internal politics of numerous nations. They didn't just fight directly, they engaged in proxy wars. For instance, they backed a coup in Bolivia in 1964 that led to the execution of Che Guevara. Through Operation Cyclone in Afghanistan, they actually funded militants to fight the Soviets, a move that directly contributed to the creation of future terrorist groups. From Brazil to Iran to the Congo, the U.S. toppled governments and created these deep global dependencies that ultimately made America even more powerful.
And the direct, lasting legacy of this Cold War strategy is honestly staggering. To maintain this immense sphere of influence, the U.S. currently operates more than 800 military bases spread across over 70 different countries around the globe. They poured unimaginable sums of money into having the absolute best military power in the world. It's a footprint unlike anything else in history.
All right, Section 5. The talent advantage, fueling innovation through immigration.
You see, military might and global interventions, that's really only half the story. American policies actively promoted a culture of innovation that drew brilliant minds from all over the entire world. Think about innovators like Albert Einstein from Germany, Elon Musk from South Africa, or Kalpana Chawla and Satya Nadella from India. The U.S. created an environment that attracted the best and brightest, and this proves that a superpower isn't just built on land and weapons, it is heavily built on imported intellectual capital and creating an ecosystem that fosters global talent.
Now for Section 6. The Superpower Reality Check. The contrast between global power and domestic life.
Okay, so we've built up the whole mythos of the superpower, right? But despite sitting on a $20 trillion economy, the everyday reality for citizens reveals some really deep domestic inequality. Look at this breakdown. The top 1% of people in the United States own an incredible 42.5% of the country's wealth. It is literally one of the most unequal distributions of wealth in the entire developed world.
Beneath the shiny surface of all this economic dominance, we see severe domestic friction. I mean, over 30% of Americans don't even own their own home. Millions struggle with a highly expensive and honestly inadequate healthcare system. College tuition is so wildly expensive that total student debt is reaching into the millions for many, many families. And public health issues like skyrocketing obesity levels drastically impact the daily quality of life.
But perhaps the most jarring thing of all is this statistic. There is an immense issue with gun violence. Over 600 mass shootings occurred in the United States in the year 2020 alone. That resulted in more than 3,000 deaths in just a single year. It really begs the question of what exactly all that geopolitical power is actually protecting. And this sets up a really fascinating contrast. Nations like Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, they are absolutely not military heavyweights. They don't have 800 military bases around the globe. But they consistently surpass the U.S. in providing a better everyday life for their citizens, prioritizing human development and well-being over global dominance. Which leaves us with this final profound thought to consider. We've seen how expansionist policies, global conflicts, and proxy wars built an undeniable empire. But instead of pouring endless wealth into global dominance and military might, should the ultimate goal of a nation simply be to improve the lives of the people who call it home? Does being a superpower even matter if the common citizen is left behind? It's a massive question, and I hope this explainer helped give you the context to think critically about the answer. Thanks for joining me, keep questioning the data, and we'll catch you next time.